Hey everyone, I'm Larry Holm, and welcome to another episode of What About Grief? Before we begin, I'd like to just say a quick note of thanks to you, the listeners, as we come to the last podcast of 2023. I didn't know where this podcast would go when we began it back in July. Who would even listen? Would there even be a second episode? Would this help anyone, or even me with my grief? Well, I have heard from you, and I thank you. Thank you for opening up to me and trusting me with your stories and feelings of loss, loneliness, and grief. Thank you for your ideas for guests and topics. It is my hope that you are addressing your grief, not holding it in, and learning that you can move forward and live your life, all the while never forgetting your loved ones. Please talk about your grief with a professional or with a friend or family member. It is so important. You are not alone. The grief community is out there, I promise. Now, let's turn our attention to this month's podcast. November's podcast on coping with grief during the holidays resonated with me, personally, on a different level. By the way, if you are struggling with the holidays and wondering how to survive them, take a listen to last month's podcast in my interview with Professor Suzanne Deggs-White, who shared some really good advice focused on getting through the holiday season. So yes, the holidays have not been the same since my wife Sarah passed away in July 2021. But recently I could tell I was finally making some progress in getting through the holiday season. But then my mom suddenly passed away in early November, after 88 wonderful years. My family and I were stunned when, after a brief 4 days in the hospital, she was gone. What? How? What just happened here? Those were just some of the thoughts that entered my mind as my family and I were in the hospital room, making the tough decision to turn her room into a hospice room. Breathing mask off, IVs removed, morphine injected, and her life slowly transitioning into the next life, which she earlier said she was ready for. It's been a few weeks now, and to be honest, I'm not sure I have truly comprehended that she is gone. Yes, I know physically she isn't in the house when I go visit my dad. She doesn't call me anymore. We had a funeral. I gave her eulogy, and we had a burial service. Yes, she is gone. But my sadness hit me more in her hospital room every day than it has since her passing. I find myself wondering why. Is it because I grieved so much after my wife died that I'm not ready for the loss of my mom just yet? I'm not sure. I'm somewhat confused, actually. I love my mom, and I'm very sad. Is parental grieving different from that of a spouse, child, or friend? I don't know the answers to these questions. So that's why I'm looking forward to the discussion with this month's guest, who I discovered by Googling the topic of parental loss and an article she wrote that caught my attention. Dr. Mary Lamia is a clinical psychologist, a professor of the doctorate program at the Wright Institute in California, author of 6 books, including her latest, Grief Isn't Something to Get Over. She is also a blogger and a member of various boards. But those are just some of the areas that occupy her time. Let's just say she is a very busy person, and I really appreciate her taking some time to speak with me. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Lamia.
Oh, Larry, thank you so much for having me. And I love that introduction. I'm sorry to hear about your mom, but isn't it interesting that grief brings up grief? It's almost like it multiplies. You know, it's exponential.
Yeah.
And so when you have a loss in the present, it brings up previous losses and kind of fills your head with loss. And given the holidays, I could imagine there's a lot going on in your head.
Yeah. And like I said, so many questions about her loss and my grief with her and my wife of 2.5 years ago. I'm just trying to decipher it all, I guess.
Well, we love people differently, so we grieve for them differently.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me into my first question. What is your definition of grief?
Yeah, we think of grief as an emotion, but is it really? I mean, technically, biologically, emotions are immediate, they're reflexive. But emotions can also be repeatedly activated, and those create a mood or a state. And grief is a state or mood. And so, an emotional state often has two or more primary emotions that are co-assembled or blended together. That's true of anxiety or jealousy or love or disappointment or loneliness and grief. So grief involves distress or anguish, a more intensely felt version of distress, combined with other emotions. The anguish can combine with shame or with anger or with fear. It can produce a state that feels very sad or very agitated. So, grief has a lot of faces.
It sure does. And for me, it's just ever changing as the days and the hours kind of go by.
And sometimes it changes based on the memory that is activated that activates the grief. It's our memories and emotions that interface with loss that produce the experience of grief. Grief is a complicated process, and we think of it, so simply. Grief is grief. You're sad. Well, but it's actually very, very involved. It's very involved with the memories that get triggered, or with even with memories we don't consciously remember. Implicit memories, unconscious memories, can become activated by a place or a thing or a situation, and we're not even aware that we're activating a memory, but our body knows it, and we feel the feeling, and we don't know where it's coming from.
I think we just discovered the name of your next book. Grief is Complicated.
Grief is complicated. It really is complicated.
Yeah, it really is. As I mentioned in the introduction, your book that just came out last year is titled Grief Isn't Something to Get Over. Why did you decide on that title? Because for me, I feel like society thinks that we should just get over it once the person has passed. But your title of the book says something different.
I was talking to my graduate students about that just this morning. They're asking about closure, and appreciated that I said that there is no closure when it comes to loss. We would like to think there's closure, but there's not closure with loss or trauma or anything big like that, because we don't erase memories. Memories are here to stay. Mm-hmm. We can't get rid of them. And if you're going to erase all of your emotional memories, well, then you could have closure. But that's not going to happen. You can put them in perspective, and that will help. Or you can, change the way you view them. That's the perspective. But so why did I title that the book Grief Isn't Something to Get Over? Because we don't get over it. For so many years, everyone seemed to believe the Kubler-Ross stage theory of loss, and that we go through these various stages of bargaining, anger, denial, whatever, and then we get over it. Well, that doesn't happen. Mm-mm. And that's been refuted for over 20 years in 1,000 research papers. And yet people still believe it, and it's still taught. It's not strange for me to see a new patient who's suffering from some loss who says, I must be in the anger stage. Well, no, there is not an anger stage. There's a lot of different feelings we feel when we have a loss. So grief isn't something to get over. It's not about getting over it. It's about what we do when memories are activated. And it's also recognizing that it's the positive memories that produce grief, not necessarily the negative ones.
Yeah. So, I never really thought of grief this way until I read your book, but it's so true what you wrote, that without memories, there is no grief, right? Because That is the engine that keeps bringing up grief, right?
Right. Without positive memories, grief is absent.
Yeah.
It's absent. It's when a positive memory is triggered. We pass a flower shop or a restaurant and we're reminded of someone we lost, uh, because we have a positive memory of being there, or some warmth associated with it. That's when we feel the grief. And again, the trick is to focus on the positive memory rather than on the loss. We tend to focus on the loss and not on the positive memory, like how nice it is that I still have that memory inside of me of doing something so special with that person and having so much fun and how attached we were. And then you could feel the loss, you could feel the grief, but try to focus on the positive memory, because that's how we keep a person with us. That's the continued bond with the person. We keep our loved ones inside of us forever.
Yeah.
And have a bond with them. And it's all based on our memories and our feelings that get evoked from those memories.
I feel like when my wife passed away, good memories brought up sadness. And I was like, well, how can I experience the holidays and the good memories that we had when they just bring me down? You know, they make me sad, and I don't have her anymore to share in future memories. So I feel like good memories sometimes can make me very sad.
Well, that's right. And so that's why I'm saying we forget to focus on the positive part of that memory that keeps the person alive inside of us. And of course, we want more of them. And we can't get more. So it becomes about us, like, we want more.
Yeah.
And that's not fair that we got cut off. You know, when we talk about losing someone we love, who's lost? The person we loved isn't lost. We're lost. We want more of them. We want more of us. And so we feel lost. We search.
So if we're lost, we think of the positive memories to help us get out of that fog?
Well, we could, but we could just acknowledge feeling lost without them. And so what are we going to do? And for every single person, it's different, because loss and grief are so private. But now this is where it gets kind of complicated. Maybe I shouldn't bring this up, but I will. There's one aspect to grief that evokes shame in us. And it's not shame as we know shame to be. The emotion of shame is also a signal that we've been disconnected from someone or something, or from an important tie. And it starts with a bit of a startle, and then we feel the disconnection, and we retreat, and we want to hide. And yet there's part of that emotional response that makes us seek the good feeling again. And that seeking response is really, really important to loss. It makes us seek to restore the bond we once had with a loved one. And so if you have this wonderful memory of your wife, and you wish she was with you so you could have more memories, that's your brain in a seeking mode, trying to restore the bond. It's looking for her. You know, our brain doesn't know that she's not there. I mean, I guess we have memories of her not being there now, but your memories of the good time make you want to find her.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way.
And so we have these seeking urges, and if we didn't have them, we wouldn't survive, because that's part of our evolution, is to make us seek something we've lost. And that's why a lot of people in the early weeks and months of loss have these symptoms where they lose something, or they think they've lost something, or they're looking for something and they can't remember what they're looking for, or something that's right before their eyes they can't really see, so they go looking for it somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's crazy symptoms.
You also wrote, in your book your thesis, and let me read it for the listeners, and then I'd like you to kind of unpack it a little bit. You said, grief isn't something we get over through absorbing a loss, traversing various stages of grief, or moving on in some way. However, we are not doomed to a lifetime of suffering from our losses. Grief has rich meaning. The people we have lost maintain a presence within our emotions, thoughts, imagery, and sensations linked to the memories of them that are activated throughout our lives. Whether we encourage or discourage their presence, loved ones who have died are always alive within us. So a lot to digest there. Can you explain that, how you came up with that for your thesis?
Well, it's sort of along the lines of what I was saying just a moment ago, is that we don't erase emotional memories. We don't erase our memories, our conscious memories and our implicit unconscious ones. They are inside of us. And so all those memories of that person are inside of us. So we don't just absorb a loss and move on in some way, but we're also not doomed to suffer forever. Just because we don't get over a loss, because we can't.
Mm.
If we love somebody, we're sad that they're not here.
Right.
It would be misguided to say all of a sudden we're not sad anymore. So, but that doesn't mean we have to suffer. Let me give you an example. I mentioned an uncle Horatio I had in that book.
Yeah, I like that.
And he was such a good role model for loss. And I noticed you're doing the same thing as he did, which is we would all be in a conversation, and then he would bring up somebody like my mother or his mother or whoever was gone, and he'd shed a few tears, or his voice would shake a little bit, and then he'd go on. It's like they are right there. It's okay to have them be right there, and it's okay for us to be sad, because there is a richness to who they are inside of us.
So does time passage help us with our memories then as time goes on?
Help us with our memories in terms of not having these responses to them?
Yeah.
I think so, because we habituate. If we have a certain memory that seems to pop up every year, say around the holiday season, we get used to remembering, and it may not have the shock or the pain. It may not have the hurt that it has. I had a patient who every single year would decorate her tree with the decorations her son had made when he was little, and he had died when he was a teenager of a horrible cancer. And she would just do it every single year, and it was very important to her. In the beginning, it felt almost impossible, but as years went on, that was her way to have him there. It also made her sad that he wasn't there. But it's okay to hold on to what we had.
Yeah. Why can I, after 2.5 years since my wife Sarah passed away, really kind of only remember when Sarah was sick, and those images are in my mind more than the happier times when she wasn't? Is there an explanation as to why I can't access the good memories versus the most recent memories of when she was alive, which was when she was dealing with cancer?
We tend to remember things that have a huge emotional charge, and the trauma of losing your wife so young is a huge emotional charge. And so the everyday memories, or even special anniversaries or birthdays or things like that you probably remember, maybe are not as prominent as the heaviness of the emotion, the fire of the emotion of when she was sick and dying. And also, given its recency, there is a recency effect. We tend to remember things that happened more recently.
Right.
And because you keep remembering and remembering and remembering, the more you focus on a particular memory, the more the neural pathway kind of forms in our brain where you're going to remember it even more. It's sort of like the new research on trauma says, is it best to delve into a trauma and what happened to you and go over it and over it again? Or is it better to try to make new emotional memories and sort of bury it a little bit under new memories? Well, they're finding that going over something in our minds too many times just makes us remember it more.
But do the memories of her being sick, is that stalling me in my grief in a way?
Well,
not
no.
moving forward? Because I feel like I am moving forward in my grief, but I didn't know if always picturing her in her cancer years is holding me back in some way. You're listening to the What About Grief podcast. We will get back to my discussion with Dr. Mary Lamia in a moment. But I wanted to remind you that you can write to us at the show with your thoughts, ideas, or a description of your own grief journey. We appreciate hearing from you, and we like being connected with our listeners. So please reach out to us via email at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com. Also, if you like the podcast and find it helpful, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating, hit the subscription button, and leave a review. All of this helps us grow the podcast. And be sure to share the link with those you know who are experiencing their own grief. The goal of the podcast is to help those, like us, navigate the confusing emotion that is grief. I'm hoping you all have a happy holiday season, and I am looking forward to our 2024 podcast season and the guests we have lined up.
No, it's not holding you back. It's holding on to her in that form.
In that state. Okay.
Yeah. And so it would, if you want to sort of, you want to think about her differently, try to activate memories of thinking of her differently by looking at photographs of places you've been together or things you've done together. Or do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
To activate other memories that make you smile.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll remember some of those. So if you looked at a bunch of photographs tomorrow, I mean, the next day you would probably remember looking at those photographs and what they were.
Yeah. It's a habit or a practice I need to get into on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's not perseverating on not over-focusing on the memories that were painful.
Yeah, yeah.
That must have been a horrible thing you went through.
It was tough. Obviously, I've never done that and gone through something like that. I will say, for 21 months, I was her caregiver, and it was the most rewarding, though, part of my life to be her caregiver. So in a way that I see some positives from that, being able to take care of her. And I remember that in a really good way and not as a bad way.
Wow, that's beautiful. And one of the ways to cope with what you've been through, a very positive way people cope, is just exactly how you've stated it. To talk about and think about what you learned and what you felt and how you connected. I mean, there's nothing good about it, really. But...
No. But I look at it as, a year of being together when COVID was happening. It was just the two of us at our home. Like that was a time, I'm not saying COVID was good in any way, but for us being together for 1 year while she was, having cancer, while she had cancer, I really cherished that time because it was just the two of us and no one else really. And that was a special bond that, will never obviously be replicated.
But you probably remember thousands of stories you created together before that.
True.
I mean, they're in there somewhere, and you probably feel them. Except when somebody is dying and we're taking care of them, there's a whole lot of sensory memories too that stick with us.
Mm-hmm.
The sights and smells and feelings around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it becomes powerful.
Yeah. What about those who have had turbulent or challenging relationships? How do their memories affect their grief? Because I correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I read this correctly in your book. Do they alter the memories the way they want to remember the story, even if it isn't accurate?
Well, the way I explain it, there's a lot of different
to go into that.
perspectives.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different perspectives. So, I think one example I gave in the book is that of a woman who just hated. I saw in treatment who hated her ex-husband.
Yes.
And then when he died, she went to the memorial and she said prayers for him.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, well, all of a sudden, he's okay.
Yeah.
Or she felt bad, but really, it was because she didn't have to be angry anymore to protect herself. When part of having memories, like negative memories about somebody, like an ex, is a way we protect ourselves. Memory is very protective. Memory helps us plan for the future and even for the present by guiding our decisions. And so if we think somebody's out there who could potentially hurt us, then our memory is going to protect us by saying, oh, the rat, I'm going to stay away from him. But if he's dead, then we know we don't necessarily have to protect ourselves anymore and can let down our guard and let some of the maybe more positive memories that are out there come back to us. So she was always holding the positive memories at bay.
Yeah. And then I guess on the other side, how do we who have lost a spouse or a child very young or a friend, when we had planned, to have a great life with that person and travel and, figure out life together, and how do we deal with future memories that won't take place?
Lost dreams.
Lost dreams,
about.
yeah.
Yes, the lost dreams are difficult because it's though we have to revise our future plans. And so that's prospective memory, what we anticipate in the future or plan for. And that's a process of just of letting go of sorts, of recognizing that we won't be able to realize those goals, those plans. Memory is it's so linear, that you expect when you have a future plan, things are going to go along and this is how it's going to be. And it's just a matter of time going by where you make those revisions. Time is very important when it comes to grief and how we revise our plans and how we revise our lives. And time is healing in some ways, and time gives us perspective because we're constantly reminded, oh, we're not going to take that trip. We're not going to do that thing.
Yeah.
But it does feel so, it's hard because it's almost like you keep remembering you were going to do that thing and you keep knowing that you have to give it up. In your introduction, you were talking about, losing a mother, losing a wife, losing a child. What's harder? There is no way to quantify that.
Yeah.
It's all so very different.
Individual.
Our relationships with people. I've wondered, I lost my parents when I was pretty young, age 11 for my mother and 21 for my dad. And my children have had me around for a long, long time. I thought, is it Is it harder for them to lose me because they've known me for so long?
Right.
Or was it harder for me to lose my parents at a younger age?
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no way to quantify that. And during the time right after this book was published, my son was months after my husband died, as I was finishing the book, my son was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I never thought I would be faced with that possibility of losing a child.
Mm.
And that was so hard to go through all that chemotherapy and the surgery and more chemotherapy and radiation and all of it. And it was some miracle that he survived.
Great.
And yet I can't even anticipate how I would feel if I had lost him.
Mm-hmm.
When you lose a child, I say losing a child is pretty much way on top of the list.
Yeah,
loss.
I would think so. I think of my mother-in-law all the time and how she lost, her daughter, my wife.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine. But looking ahead, how important, though, to us grievers is hope then? That something good is out there for us in the future. What does that do to us mentally, that there is possibly hope?
Well, I talk about hope because hope is that aspect of prospective memory, looking ahead and taking who we are and putting ourselves into the future in some way. And in the beginning, when you have a significant loss, like a loss of a spouse, for example, it's really difficult to think about one's life in some other way than you had anticipated it would be. But having some hope that you will find that is important. Hope is a really incredibly important feeling to have, that even if you're not feeling good right now, that you could hope to create some memories or hope to have something in the future. Does being hopeful change things? No, not necessarily, but sometimes it helps our perspective as we walk into the future, because we're not going to change the past. The past is gone.
Before I wind this up and read you the story and get your thoughts on this, you wrote in your book that I really liked, "The logic of grief is mysterious." To me, that really does sum it up. It's so personal and different for all of us, and it is so mysterious. How did you come up with that word, which is perfect, mysterious? And also, where does grief measure up in regard to other emotions we experience in life?
Well, two very different questions.
Yes.
Well, let's start with the logic of grief. I think I came up with that because I was reading a lot of more philosophical literature about grief and different kinds of literature about grief, and it kept pointing to it being illogical. That there really isn't any logic to it, or it's mysterious at best. We try so hard to make sense out of loss and the grief we feel, and it's very hard to do. And I tried to do that in the book by teaching people about emotions and memories and how they function together, and that's why we grieve. And so I wanted to make some logic, some sense out of grief. It's not completely nonsensical, but it is mysterious. And learning about emotions and how they work and memories and how they interface with loss really, really gives it a face that we can understand a little bit better. And so you said, then, where does grief measure up in regards to other emotions we experience in life? Well, all emotions are different, So, as I said, grief is a combination of primary emotions, of what we call primary emotions. And so is love and jealousy and shame and not shame. Shame is a primary emotion. So is love and jealousy and so many other feelings we experience. Where does it measure up? It's unique. They're all unique.
Yeah. All right, one more quick one, because you had so many good things in this book. I'll wrap it up with this. Grief.
I'm just so happy you liked it. That's
I really
such a compliment.
Yeah, no, it was really helpful to me, and I know it will be to others. Yeah, so let me end it with this. Grief tells us the unhappy truth we may rather not know, but it does not tell us to be miserable in every aspect of our lives. I feel like that is really important for people to understand that, yes, we have to deal with our grief. It sucks, but don't let it ruin your life. Move forward. Try to comprehend it and deal with it.
Yes, emotions give us information. That's why we have them. They're part of the information that helps us survive. And just because we feel so awful with grief, we misinterpret what it's telling us as we're supposed to be miserable.
Right.
But we're not.
Yeah. Don't live in this dark closet. Get out there and still live your life.
To the best that you can.
Yeah, to the best you can.
And that doesn't mean ever that you'll forget that person you loved and lost.
Correct. Yep. Yep. So I'd like to wrap up this episode with a story I recently read from a few years back that deeply touched my heart, and it speaks to how our senses and memories can provide comfort as we live with grief. Here we go. London subway commuters have long been accustomed to hearing the recorded announcement overhead advising them to mind the gap when entering or exiting subway cars. But that voice was extra special to Dr. Margaret McCullum. As widow of theater actor Oswald Lawrence, who read the announcements, she loved hearing it when he was alive, and it became even more important to her after his death. She could regularly go to one of the stops on London's tube just to sit and hear her husband's voice. In 2012, she was stunned to hear an electronic recording instead of Oswald's beloved voice. She inquired and was told a new digital system was in place for the announcements. But staffers at the Transport for London Authority were deeply touched by her story, and the following year they gave her a gift, a CD recording of Oswald's voice and reinstatement of his voice at her tube station, Embankment, which you can still hear to this day. I love this story. And Mary, from a professional perspective, how would you describe what Margaret would do to hear her husband's voice at the tube station? It's like hearing his voice made him present or alive, or she connected with her husband again in some way.
And we can evoke wonderful, warm memories of somebody by doing things like that, whether it's, going into the station and hearing her husband's voice. Gosh, that's so touching.
Mm-hmm.
Or on Thanksgiving, I made fettuccine with my 5-year-old grandson. That's what my mother did for the Thanksgiving holiday. Sure, there was flour from one side of the kitchen to the other. But he also said it was the best day of his life.
Yeah, that's sweet.
And I hope he remembers his Nonna making fettuccine with him, like I remember, my grandmother and my mother cooking during the holidays.
Yeah.
So, yes, we can evoke memories just by, tweaking our life a little bit. And that's a good thing. So many people try to stay away from the subway station because they wouldn't want to hear the voice because it would make them sad.
Right.
And she is doing exactly what I'm talking about, which is it's okay to keep them with you.
You're right.
It's okay to remember, and it's wonderful to remember and to learn how to enjoy the memories rather than try to push them away.
Yeah. I hope you captured that fettuccine making on an iPhone for you to have.
Yes. Yes.
Good.
I have many pictures and pictures of him eating it too.
That's great. Well, I'm going to come over one day and have some fettuccine with you. It sounded great.
Anytime, but it's messy.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm a little OCD. I'll come and clean. So I'm a perfect cleaner. Yes.
Good, please.
I'll make a deal. Clean for a dish of fettuccine.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mary Lamia. Come back anytime, and I hope you have a happy holiday with your family.
Thank you so much, Larry. It's wonderful to be with you and to share with you.
And to all of you, please check out Dr. Lamia's website at marylamia.com. Also, I highly recommend reading her latest book that we discussed, Grief Isn't Something to Get Over. I think you will benefit from it in so many ways. We barely touched the surface on what she wrote in that book, and like I said, I'm going to read it again because it's been very helpful to me. So thank you again, Dr. Lamia.
Thank you.
My thanks to Dr. Mary Lamia. What About Grief is available monthly on all major podcast listening platforms. Please follow the podcast as well as rate and review the show on Apple Podcast. The executive producer of What About Grief is Marcia Anderson. Logo artwork was designed by TED Studios. This episode was recorded at BAM Studios in Chicago. And lastly, feel free to email us at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com.